The topic for today is we want to stop surviving, start thriving, and prepping, planning, and prioritizing for possible disruptions. And my guest today is Susan. I'm going to let Susan introduce herself, and then we'll just go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. My name is Susan Lamke. I'm the Director of National Training here at Boys Town. I've been with Boys Town for 32 years, working here on our campus with our teaching model on our 1 square mile with adolescents. And then I had the opportunity to take that model into my own classrooms in the Omaha Public School District, grades K through 8. And then I returned to our National Training Department where I've been able to have the opportunity to work with my team and provide training and follow-up consultation to schools coast to coast. So welcome to those of you that have joined us today.
Awesome. And I can definitely vouch, at least in the time that I've known Susan, very, very busy. And we appreciate Susan on the team and everything that she does here. Her name might be familiar to some people that are joining. And for those of you who are joined, and obviously as more people get on, feel free to use the chat. We will try to get to some questions. And your questions are probably more important than anything we had to say. So feel free to ask them as we talk, and we will get to those and answer them. So again, like I mentioned, the title or the subject for today is Stop Surviving, Start Thriving, Prepping, Planning, and Prioritizing for Possible Disruptions. So Susan, we're a couple months into the school year. I got a notification yesterday for my kids on some mid-quarter finals coming up, which is just insane to think about. But that's where we're at. So talk to me a little bit. Why did you pick this topic? What does this topic mean to you, Susan?
I guess what this topic means to me is just I know as a prior educator, and I know educators out there. I know some of you've been in school like Timothy's kiddos for a couple of months, and some are just in a couple of weeks, depending on which coast you're joining us from. Oftentimes, what we do is we go in to our year excited, and we've got all of our rules posted and our procedures, and we've got the seating chart, and we've got kids' name tags, and or we know which seating chart for which kids or which period are coming in, and we've got a lot of high aspirations and we're enthusiastic. On the flip side, kids are also really excited and enthusiastic about coming back to school. And now's about the time where everybody's getting settled into routines and dynamics of the classroom. You're getting to know your students a little bit better. You're getting to know the dynamics among them, and trying to just determine, are those things that I set up at the beginning of the year working out the way that I thought they would. So it's important to me to just, oftentimes what we do is we go in at the beginning of the year with all that enthusiasm, we set those expectations, we talk to kids about them for the first few days, even first few weeks, maybe post a few reminders on the wall, and then we sort of abandon ship. And so then we start to go into that survival mode. And so if we can just continue that momentum and keep those things rolling throughout the year, then we can just start to thrive. And so now that you've got some data on your students, how they interact with each other, how they respond to your day, your routines, those kinds of things, just take that moment to self-reflect and, is my room in the best arrangement? Is it working well? Do I need to change that seating chart? Do I have a certain group of kids that maybe would be more successful with each other or away from each other? Are there any times of the day with my current class that are proving to be challenging that maybe I didn't anticipate? And is there anything I can do to head that off? Is there a new procedure or rule or expectation that I can put into place to just avoid that? So it's really just not losing that momentum of prevention. And that's oftentimes what people do. So I had to learn that the hard way a couple of times, and that's why it's so important to me.
Yeah, and that's good. So again, when the school year starts, one of the words that I know that you like to use is we're uploading children, like we're uploading information, right? So we put all this out there at the beginning, and now the kids are kind of settled into a routine, and we're figuring out now, right, if that routine that we set up actually is working, or if maybe we need to make adjustments. Talk to me a little bit about that maybe the tolerance levels that we allow in our classrooms, and maybe what we can do to keep those at a tolerant level.
Definitely. So our tolerances are just simply communicating to students what behaviors are acceptable in your space and place and what behaviors are not acceptable in your space and place. And so it goes back to what we just talked about. Do you have your expectations, your rules, procedures, all of those things in line with what that communicate to kids? These things are okay in my classroom. These things over here are not okay. And so have you really clearly defined what those are and communicated that to your students? And so just checking with yourself to make sure. Kids also aren't one-time learners. So like Timothy said, we really want to front load them at the beginning and repeat ourselves a lot, but then we want to remind them. And you'll get to know different students in your class, different periods, different times of the day where they need a little more front loading or reminding than normal. Because basically what you're doing through all of that is you're creating safety and predictability for kids. They know what to expect. They know what's next. They know what you want them to do in certain situations. And albeit they may or may not like that all of the time, they at least know what's coming and they know what to expect. And those kinds of things just make kids more receptive to learning because they're not trying to figure out what the boundaries are all of the time. And so it really just communicates your tolerance levels to kids. And so sometimes we'll go into the year with our tolerances too high. We've got really high expectations and we don't have a lot of room for flexibility or fun. And it's very almost very rote and routine, and there's not a lot of flexibility for kids to be kids and be relaxed in their learning. On the flip side, sometimes we go into the year wanting to build that relationship or wanting kids to like us, and our tolerances are too low. And so we allow too much misbehavior, and then we want to back that up and kind of put the kibosh on some of that. And that seems kind of unfair and arbitrary to kids. So if we could go in with those really clear boundaries and expectations, communicate those to kids, and then hold them to that, and then try to be consistent throughout the week and throughout the school year, that's going to be really beneficial for kids. And so we know, well, I at least know from my experience, as I'm sure some of you out there do, is sometimes our tolerance levels look a little different on Monday morning than they do on Friday afternoon. They look a little different in August than they do in December, then again in April or May. And if we can have that wiggle room between what's okay and what's not minimal, that's okay. Kids understand that. They also know tolerances are different from activity to activity, from room to room, from place to place in the building. But when our tolerance levels are all over the place, it gets really confusing for kids. And then they don't know what to predict and they don't know what the consistent routine is. And that's when they kind of you'll start to see some of those misbehaviors increase.
Yeah. As a teacher, and again, feel free for people to chime in on the chat on this one, but as a teacher, if the tolerances have kind of gotten out of balance, how can we bring that tolerance back into balance without, obviously if we're not consistent, there's a lack of trust that can form. So how can we bring those tolerances back into acceptable range without losing trust with the students?
Sometimes when kids push those boundaries and those limits, we get reactionary. Sometimes they hit a nerve for us, and so we get reactionary, and we just simply want to extinguish the misbehavior. And so, just sometimes taking that quick time out and just saying, "Hey, let's all just take a breath. Let's just regroup. Let's remember what we're supposed to be doing during this time of day." Maybe they're supposed to be raising their hand or waiting their turn, or maybe this is a time they can just popcorn information out. Those types of things. So sometimes it's just taking that pause, letting them regroup and restating the expectation versus jumping right away to that reactionary correction or reaction, or oftentimes it's a consequence. And I think it's also really important that as you're communicating rules, procedures, your expectations, that you not only tell the students what they are, but actually teach it, go through the steps, model it, give them some opportunities to actually practice those different things. School is a hard place. For us adults, all of this probably seems pretty mundane and yeah. And I've heard this in other professional development and that type of thing. But if you really look at it through the eyes of a student, school's a hard place to be. For some students, if they're young, it's their first time there. Maybe they're in middle or high school and it's their first year there. Maybe it's just now a new teacher, a new environment. Maybe I'm in a new school building. I've got different classmates. And so school's a hard place to navigate. I have to line up. I have to use different voice tones in different spaces and places. I have to do different tasks. And this teacher tells me to transition this way, and this one tells me this way. So really communicating those things seems, again, kind of mundane and routine to us. And how many times do I have to repeat it? But for kids, it's good information and it's new information. So if you can teach, model, practice, that's going to be helpful. And then also give them the why. So that's the how, but give them the why and offer kids reasons. We have these safety rules in class, so you say stay, so our equipment stays intact, so that we can go to lab. We want everybody to raise their hand and take turns, so everybody gets to be heard, so everyone has a chance. So you're creating that inclusive community. It's also nice to have students give input into what the rules are, and then again, just giving them the why. These rules, these procedures, these expectations help you. So what's the benefit to them as a student? So you're kind of selling it to them in a way, but you're really letting them know that all these parameters and boundaries are in place so that we have a nice learning environment and a safe place to learn. And if they understand how it benefits them as a student and even them as a class, that can be really helpful. I know, if my boss asks me to do something and just tells me to do it, I might be like, whatever, or I'll do it. But if he tells me the why or explains how it's going to be helpful or beneficial down the road, even if it's something maybe I don't want to do, I'm more likely to do it or at least understand the importance of it. And kids aren't any different. So if we can just take that time to give them reasons, they also then see that these structures are in place, they're here to stay, it's important for all of us and why, and it's not just arbitrary and based on my mood. And so sometimes I think that's a step we leave out because we've got a lot to do and a lot to cover in a short amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that, the why. I mean, just think, my again, I have small elementary children, but kids are curious regardless of age. But if you think about how many times a elementary person asks why versus a high school individual, and they're still curious, but we've been trained from such a young age to stop asking, right? Just do as you're told. And the problem with that is what we've done is then we've created kids who are just, they do what they're told sometimes, but they're still curious. So understanding that why is very, very important. And it brings them into the loop of feeling like they know what's going on. I like that. I like that. So again, it's maybe a few weeks in, a month in or 2 months in. We've gotten to know our outgoing students, right?
Mhm.
We've got to know the ones that are make themselves known. Talk to me though about the importance of building relationships in your classroom.
Absolutely. I think every educator does a really nice job with this at the beginning of the year, really just getting to know kids. Um, and what they like and what they don't like. And I think again, that's that. Let's keep that momentum going. What other activities can you do in your classroom or your space and place to get to know kids? Asking them their interests, just observing them and seeing what they like to do, what they like to wear, listening to their conversations. What music do they like? What foods do they like to eat? Who do they hang out with? What do they do in their free time? What games do they like? That type of thing. And so, really, just trying to touch base with kids every day. I'm sure many of you on the webinar have heard and read and seen the YouTube videos about the importance of greeting students and be at that doorway, have a smile on your face, greet every student. It's just a nice way to look into those eyes, to take a little litmus test, see how they're doing that day. If you've got a kiddo who's got sometimes some challenging behavior, but they also have some really good leadership skills. And you can tell maybe they're on the fence that day. I see maybe this kiddo's struggling. Can I go and have a one-on-one conversation or just ask a question as they enter the room to see how they're doing? Can I assign them a job or a task or have them help me with something to channel that energy that I know they have into something positive? So it's really about knowing, taking that few minutes to look into their eyes, to touch base with them, even if it's helping them one-on-one with academics. And then again, that greeting, even when they, telling them goodbye, having them exit the room, just really seeing how they're doing in the different ways that you can. And so when you pair those relationship strategies with the boundaries that you've set, now you kind of have that balance of that warmth or your head and your heart. We've got the boundaries, we've got the to-dos, we've got here's how you navigate school and here's how you do your job as a student. But there's also some compassion, some empathy, and some grace along the way, because being a kid is hard, navigating school is hard. And frankly, we need it as adults too. And so I think that's a nice two-way street. So that needs to continue as well. And
Yeah.
then I think just taking that a step farther and collecting that data as the year goes on, really watching them, really listening, really talking to them, you know, reinforce their approximations of meeting your expectations, reinforce them when they do, reinforce them when they do well. And we're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for them to do the best they can do and celebrate with them. We at Boys Town really focus on creating that positive environment by just simply using a 4-to-1 ratio. Every time you have to correct or redirect a kiddo, to try to catch them being good or reinforce an effort about 4 times. And so really focusing on that positive. And what that does is it gives you that strength-based approach. So if I could take a look at what every child brings and what they're good at and help channel that, it helps them to feel a sense of accomplishment, and they're more willing to take some of those risks and try some new skills, whether they're academic or social. Our founder of Boys Town, Father Flanagan, he's famous for saying, I never met a boy who wanted to be bad. And so even our most challenging students, that's not their goal for the day. Sometimes that misbehavior that you will see in your classroom is just them trying to communicate something to you, and they just don't always have the words to do that. So,
Yeah, that's again, that's so good. And Father Flanagan was much more well worded than my grandpa. He said, "Never judge a fish by how it climbs a tree." And
right.
but I like Father Flanagan's. That looks a little better on the sign.
Yeah.
But no, that's very good. And obviously, our kids all have strengths, and they're all different. And so finding what those are, and I like that too. Maybe you have a kid that is a little bit more rambunctious, but maybe he's looking for a task, and how can I incorporate that kid into and get him useful and get him or her involved in the class. So again, obviously, we know, regardless of how our day starts off, we know usually by the end of the day, a misbehavior or a disruption creeps in. Um, we can kind of plan on that, right? We know that that's going to happen throughout the day. What are some things that we can do to set our day up properly or get our mindset properly for that?
I think you kicked off the mindset perfectly. Just know misbehavior is going to happen. And like I mentioned, kids will behavior is communication, and sometimes they meet our expectations, and some days they just don't because they can't or they won't. And it goes back to even that front loading and that prevention that I started off with of when kids really understand what those boundaries, those parameters, your tolerances, they're more likely to meet them. When they are really inconsistent, like I mentioned, then kids have to limit test and see where is it today. Well, I know where it was Friday when I went home, but how are we going to do on Monday? Is it the same? Is the tolerance level higher? Is it lower? Is it still in the middle? So some kids, you're going to see that misbehavior. And you might, if you haven't seen it yet, you'll start to see it more and more. It's kind of that honeymoon is over. Kids are settled. They're getting to know each other. Your classroom dynamics are starting to get established. So some of it's limit testing. Sometimes kids just don't understand the rule or the procedure, or they don't have the skills to follow it or to do it. And then others just choose not to. So I think if we have that mindset of it's going to happen and they're trying to communicate something to us, then that's going to be half of our battle. The other one is just having a continuum of correction and having those strategies on your tool belt. I've done the front loading, and so if I can be preventive and really reinforce using that 4-to-1 ratio, then when kids do misbehave, if I have that continuum of correction, so when behaviors are low level, like talking, tapping, just kind of looking around the room, nothing big, but they're starting to lose focus. They're starting to get off track. What are those low level interventions you can do? We can all use our eye contact and our best teacher look. We can use proximity, shake our head, remind them to be quiet or what the voice tone is, point to a procedure perhaps. So when the behavior is low level, are you addressing it with a low level strategy? Oftentimes it quits right away, but it lets kids know, I see you, I'm with you, and I'm trying to bring you back. Oftentimes, if we just choose to ignore it, what we ignore, we condone. So if we address the little things, it prevents sometimes the big things from happening. But bigger things are going to happen. So sometimes you might have a child who's just talking in class, and you can give them that nonverbal or just walk close and do the proximity, remind them of the expectation, and they fix it. Sometimes that doesn't last very long and they go back. So it's either a continued behavior over time, or maybe now they're louder or they're getting more kids into the conversation. So again, I can just move up that continuum. I don't have to go from the look to something big, but I can just go up that continuum and, maybe do a redirect, restate my expectation. Like we mentioned earlier, take that time out and talk about what, listening looks like or what staying on task looks like in that time. If you have a question or a comment, go ahead and just raise your hand and I'm happy. We all want to hear what you have to say, and doing it with some of that grace and dignity. So maybe it's a little bit more of a redirection. And then as behaviors get bigger, or if they continue, or if they go on longer, or the correction is only short lived, is there a conversation that you have with students? And what does that conversation look like? And we have found that if you keep that conversation focused around your rules, your procedures, any skills you want kids to use, it keeps the judgment out and keeps it focused on the foundation of what you asked them to do in the first place. And so you don't have to get creative, and you don't have to talk long, and just offer them that replacement. And oftentimes they'll redirect.
Awesome. Very good. And again, I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. And so as we kind of wrap this up, and it seemed like our time went very, very fast, but I was talking to a teacher last year. It was her first year teaching. And, as the year went on, she loved what she did, but it was just every day it was dealing with, yeah, you have to educate. You're also dealing with behavior.
Yep.
And just every day, day after day, she was just tired, right? Just tired. Um, A, what can we do to take care of ourselves? And then B, is it all on us? And so as we wrap this up, and again, we have people who may have been doing this for years and years and years, or brand new. So can you speak to that just a little bit, Susan?
Yes. So, like you said, sometimes we just get tired, or students that are challenging or engage in misbehaviors often. It continues and they're just a little more challenging and they don't respond to that redirection. And so, if we can uh, offer that replacement behavior, help to calm them down if they start to lose some of that self control, that's going to be helpful. But kids can't fix what they don't know. So, always, once kind of, things have calmed down, offering that replacement behavior, what they could have, should have done, and how they can do it better next time or try to, because again, they're not one time learners, and then reinforcing that along the way. Also, keep safety first. So making sure that they have the privacy and dignity to get themselves together. And then use your team. Always remember your team approach. So if you have a particular student that's challenging and you're seeing a lot of misbehaviors, your continuum of correction is getting exhausted day after day. Talk to your colleagues in the building. Does this student have other teachers? What strategies are they using? Are they seeing similar behaviors? Is it a time of day? Is it a support that we can offer this young person? Is it maybe some kid dynamics that we need to intervene with that's maybe causing the problem? So taking that team approach of really trying to determine what supports this child needs, or what structures we can put in place to help support them. And then always, always remember their caregivers. They are experts on their children. They know their children best. And so sometimes even reaching out to the families and saying, you're the expert on Timothy. What do you see similar behaviors? And again, keeping it very behavioral skill focused is very helpful because it keeps that judgment out. Are you seeing similar behaviors at home? Do you have any strategies that work? Here's what we're trying in class. How can we come together and be those partners in change to help support this young person? And so that can be really helpful. So always remember that team approach. And I think when communicating with the child's caregivers, of keeping that spirit of 4-to-1 in mind, of that positive to negative ratio, the more I can reach out to a child's family if I need to, the more I can do that with positive or neutral information when I do have to let them know maybe the behaviors really couldn't come back around today. We're all more receptive to jump in and help support that young person. And then again, you can't do any of this if you don't take care of you. And I know right now, self-care and take care of you is kind of a cliche and probably overused. But a really cool thing to do is to incorporate it throughout your day. Again, continue to do all of these things and teach your kids. So take some deep breaths, do some journaling, play some nice music in class, maybe just do a read aloud to wrap up your day, or a time of day that maybe the kids are a little antsy or you're seeing the challenging behaviors. You have to take care of you in order to do your best support with them. And so I think sometimes instead of trying to carve out one more minute, which you don't have for you, if you can teach that to your students and do it alongside them, that can help all of you and things get a little unwieldy, if you will.
I love that, and I really really do love that insight. Incorporating your kids with your own um, me time. I like that. So that's very very good. Again, we have really just gone through this very very quickly, and I know that you could have spoken on each one of these topics the entire time. And so thank you very very much for fitting all this in to about 25 minutes. I really really appreciate that. I do want to give a just kind of a a plug here for Boys Town. Obviously, if you're on the webinar, you're familiar maybe a little bit with us, and whatever level you're familiar with Boys Town on, I encourage you, obviously working with, whether we're working with children or working with adults, people spawn problems, and problems are a reason for a solution. And so here at Boys Town, we try to have solutions for most of our everyday problems that you might face. And so I encourage you to jump on our site. We have our Boys Town Press with loads of information on there. This webinar will be available for future watching or download. Feel free to reach out to Susan or myself, and we can put our email addresses in the chat here. But I really appreciate everybody jumping on. And Susan, thank you so much again for your insight. And we look forward to talking to you again. So
Absolutely. You got our boystowntraining.org on the chat, right, Timothy?
Jackson just put it in the chat, so I appreciate that, Jackson.
Yes.
Or he put the press in there, and then the boystowntraining.org is in there as well. So again, everyone, feel free to jump on. We will let you get back to your busy days, and thank you so much.